Oh, hey guys, how you going?
These bottles are lonely. It's a moment when I show up, God, I'm saying wow.
So guys, welcome back to my channel. So today we're gonna have actually this is my friend RJ.
Yeah.
So
hey, I'm RJ. What's good?
as like I stated, I'm gonna have people on my channel that I feel like I want to have a discussion about. And today's topic is gonna be about the aspect of women and how we judge them based on like sexual premise and sexual experience, and we call them hoes in certain aspects of having many different partners. So I'm gonna start it off with one of the questions that we wrote down was, what does sexual liberation look like to you? So while that's a general question for like everyone, but like since RJ's here,
New York is a loud place.
yes, New York is a very loud place. So yeah, so the question is, what does sexual liberation look like to you? And we're still framing it in the aspect of like a woman, male kind of nuance, but the truth is based for women. So what do you think like sexual liberation looks like?
I think for a woman, that sexual liberation has a lot to do with having confidence in yourself, but also I think in this day and age where there's so much judgment regardless, I think it's really about not caring. And I think that it takes a lot more strength for a woman to be sexually liberated than a man, just because of the fact that, you know, a man having sex with a bunch of women is, you know, a goal or seen as success, and it's seen as a negative for a woman. But I think that being sexually liberated is having confidence in your own sexuality and your own decisions, and understanding that it's up to you and it's not up to anybody else.
Right, but so you said like having confidence in yourself, and so a woman can be confident in themselves, but then I guess like the male aspect comes into play, where it's just like this woman is seen as this because she does this. So while she can have confidence in herself, we then kind of try to strip that.
Yeah, but I think that part of having the confidence in herself, being a woman, is understanding that like I have the responsibility of a human to care about, you know, what I want to do and do the things that I want to do. And that part of that confidence is also being confident in what the reaction will be. But in the same sense is that women shouldn't have to care about the reaction at all. So when you're truly confident in yourself, you kind of just do what you want to do and do what you're meant to do, and you kind of let the chips fall where they may, regardless of how people will interact, regardless of how people will react to what you're doing.
Okay, so the confidence in yourself is just like this armor that you always need to have so that society doesn't like break it down.
Yeah.
And kind of like belittle you.
Especially because society changes. So if you kind of have that shield, as you said, that comes from yourself, it's so much easier to adapt because you're continuing to just be yourself. You're not changing to the way that society is.
Right. So the next question would be, who and why does society give the ability to have sexual liberation in the aspect of just like sex? Like I guess we don't give the sexual liberation aspect to women.
I think that it has to do with propaganda, but also just like individuals in entertainment and stuff like that starting to speak out now more when they used to kind of hold their tongue. And you know, even people like Marilyn Monroe, who I believe was a very sexually liberated person. She was also on both sides of the conversation, where there were some women who felt like she was being strong, and there were some women who felt like she was showing too much as men, as some people felt like, you know, she was this amazing bombshell, and some people thought that, you know, would call her, you know, they would slut shame her. So,
right.
I think that it's one of those things where Marilyn Monroe, for me, is an example of being who you are, but she still didn't necessarily have that shell of confidence that I think that you need to survive, you know, the beginning, middle, and end of being a woman and a person that desires sexual liberation in the type of world that we live in right now. But I think that society has to have, or at least big up more people who are confident in their sexuality, to the point where they can kind of influence the generations to come after.
Okay, and fine. So since you said also there were women who tore her apart in the aspect of showing too much, so do you feel like the women who tear her apart is women who lack confidence in themselves, or they're speaking from the male point of view?
I think that it's hard to say why women will do things that could be considered as against themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I think that some of it it's hard to pinpoint. I don't think that it would be right for me to generalize a reason why some women attack other women. But I do think that aspects of jealousy. I think that aspects of Christian traditionalism in America.
Right.
I
The
think
Victorian era.
Yeah, I think all that has to play a part.
Right.
And that there's a lot of other parts that clearly I didn't bring up, but there's a lot of other things that kind of influence a woman's decision to do that on a case-by-case basis. But I also think that a big thing is that, when you are confident in yourself and you are sexually liberated, that people are going to be jealous of that because more people are insecure in their sexuality than confident.
Right. So, okay, in the aspect of that, why is it that women are belittled and berated for having how many ever sexual partners they have is based on, I guess, like penetrative? Like, is it seen like as like the physical aspect that is occurring through sex? Like, why is that like a thing?
I think that it comes from a very misogynistic background, but it comes from the things that we've seen from the beginning of the hunter versus the gatherer,
right.
And that the hunter is kind of supposed to go out and seek women and conquer women, and it's one of those things where if you aren't overtly sexual or express it in a specific way, people will also start to question you. They might even say that you're homosexual because you're not fitting in their way of being a straight man that's going after women. And that's kind of the mindset, especially both in hookup culture, whether you go to the club or whatever, it's just kind of this idea of guys being like, I need to, conquer this woman, or I have this
right.
goal of getting a woman. And that it's different for women immediately because the way I think the approach to sexuality when it comes to the group of women is that it's not necessarily seen as you can do whatever you want and then you deal with it after the fact. It's kind of like you have to walk on tighter eggshells just in the whole interaction in general.
But why? Do we think that we have an idea? I think it's like the physical aspect of like a woman being more or less penetrated is the ideal of why we're calling her a hoe.
I think that it's the mentality of, if you're a man, you're supposed to conquer as many women as you can, and that when a woman does that, she is the prize.
Right.
So if the prize is not treating themselves as a prize, in that mindset of you're supposed to conquer these things and achieve and obtain these things, if the thing that you're supposed to obtain is not treating itself as something that is precious, then it is therefore the opposite.
But where did we get that thought process, Beta?
I think that the process comes from the ideas of when men and women were first building communities. The men were the people that went out and hunted. The men were the people that did all the aggressive action.
Right.
And what came with that, especially if you were to pillage a city, you would also rape the women.
Right.
That was part of the whole mindset and the whole approach of being an aggressive man for thousands of years. So now the approach of the men having to conquer has continued. And it's the whole idea of we're supposed to conquer this precious thing. When a precious thing, making it seem like that person doesn't have any part of the decision when it comes to the sexual intercourse in the end. But when you take it from the reverse, if a woman doesn't take that role of I am the prize, I am the precious prize,
right.
and she kind of is like, I'll just throw myself at anything, then people are like, okay, that means you are taking value away from yourself. And you are making the conscious decision to not be seen as the valuable asset that you actually are.
Right.
But that mindset all comes from misogyny in the sense of like, you're not even approaching the conversation as two human beings. You're approaching the conversation as a conqueror and an object. And
right.
That's where the issue really lies.
Well, I have a question based on what you said, like throwing yourself. But say fine, they could throw themselves at whoever they want. But even if they strategically choose who they want to sleep with multitudes, why is that why is it our concern, and why are we so threatened by that? And like women can feel pleasure also. So I don't understand why that is a problem.
Because men have always been in power due to the whole thing of I'm hunting, I'm getting the food, I'm providing for the family, I'm helping the family survive. Even
Right.
though the women gathered, and that was an important part, men felt because they were doing the dirty work, the hard work of having to kill animals and things like that, they felt like they were more in line to therefore make the decisions. And that just kind of continued over time for thousands of years, to the point where men have always had the mindset of we do this work, we provide for the family, meaning we are the leaders, we are the people that make decisions. So when that mindset continues over, there's no reason to flip it, even if you were to have a woman leader in between all those things. Changing the generalized mindset of men have always been the provider, we have to continue to be the provider, and what comes with being the strong man are all these underlying issues. Conquering women is part of that, and then being the gatherer, the person that stays home, and all those undertones that have been playing just women progression for thousands of years as well. There's nobody to stop that. There aren't many images that can kind of stop that mindset. And so
Right.
when things continue for that long, they just continue to happen, and we're now in an ecosystem that's just a cycle.
So do we now think, like, since we're even having this conversation, I find it to be a little bit problematic within itself.
That will continue to happen.
That we're continuing to have this conversation based on women are labeled this, that, and the third because they have this. And the fact that we have to make it a conversation, I still think is still problematic, because we have to identify that because women do this, because they do that, and because they have sexual partners, and because they want to feel pleasure, or they want to do whatever they like with their bodies, we label them. And I remember a quote based on James Baldwin saying, like, we make up these words and we need to establish who came up with them and why we came up with them, because it only causes damage, but yet we label it and we just call it as it is, because I guess I probably think that men are just fragile, and they feel, I think it goes back into like some sense of like sexual, if you want to say it's sexually deviant, but I would just think that the sexuality of men are fragile, that they can't fathom the thought of a woman being sexually experienced or just as on the same level as them.
I mean, I think that it more has to do with the gender roles that we have allowed to fester for so long. And when...
So the expected gender.
Yeah, no, exactly. But I mean, that the gender norms and the normal gender roles that exist in every single country along the planet. And it's one of those things where when something is that deeply ingrained in not just, you know, each country's society, but into a whole world society,
Right.
most men are going to come with the entitlement that leads to a lot of issues, especially in the bedroom. When it comes to, you know, a man being a little bit more aggressive, or a man being able to kind of take more risks and all these things.
Mm-hmm.
But I also feel like the whole concept of men being on this kind of I need to conquer things is just not even kind of not even approaching the situation as there's two humans involved.
Right.
And so when you don't have,
So
when
more
you're thinking of
objectifying.
yeah, but when you're ever in a situation where both sides aren't looking at the other as you are a human being in this,
Right.
it's hard to imagine that one of those sides would make, you know, a decision that really takes into account the other person's well-being.
Okay. And like, so one of my final questions is, I was reading this article in like my human sexuality class, which was talking about the aspect of red light districts kind of thing, of like sex workers and stuff like that, and how in certain countries they curate the woman more, as in the sense of like high risk factors for diseases and stuff like that. But how would we not also, like, if you want to say quarantining or checking the men? Because if you're saying that these sex workers, are you calling them hoes, blah, 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 but men are still having sex with these sex workers, so how are they not? You would quicker say the woman is a hoe, so what exactly is the man then?
I personally think that men that get prostitutes are looked down upon because they're skipping that whole conquering, like that whole process. And that when you cheat and you kind of just like give money, is that those type of people are also shamed too. I think that sex workers are shamed, but I think it's because that, from that same thing that I'm saying, that if women, that mindset of, oh, women should think that they're a prize and should hold themselves as a prize and gussy themselves up as a prize, and that when you don't do those things to the fullest, you are making yourself lesser. You are making the decision to not just portray yourself as lesser, but you're inviting people to perceive you as lesser. And that's kind of the issue with
women.
Yeah. No, I think sex workers in general, but definitely because women are seen as the face of sex workers, that I think that women take it a lot more. But I think that at the end of the day, it's not about if you have sex, that should determine your value. You know?
So someone called, guys, sorry. So you were saying?
So I was saying is that in the sense of the red light district and why sex workers are looked at the way that they are, is I think that it's based in that, you know, women are supposed to be prizes, they're supposed to be conquered, they're supposed to hold themselves to a certain standard so that they can be seen as the value that they are.
Okay.
But I think that sex shouldn't at all be based in an individual's value, especially because if you're a sexually liberated person, you make your own sexual decisions for yourself, and you are trying to help yourself, and that also has nothing to do with value because it's what you enjoy and it's what you want. So when people try to connect someone's sexual activity with their value, they're not actually looking at that person as a human. They're looking at that person that's supposed to be an object for specific actions.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. But I still feel like, so back to like the aspect of like the woman though. Like, so we kind of like say like the woman is considered this because of the body and what we expect the body should be. It's a temple, blah, blah, blah. But we still don't see the aspect of the man in this perspective, where the sex workers, yes, a majority are female, but we still consider the sex worker who is female to be considered dirty.
Yeah, I know.
Or so why not the man? The man who is
the
inserting
men-
himself into
I think
this.
that a man that gets a prostitute is looked at in a negative way. I don't think that
Is it?
I don't think that people who get prostitutes are open about it. Personally,
They wouldn't be open about it.
they wouldn't be. You got to understand that shame doesn't just come from the inside. It's them knowing that they would not be looked at as, oh yeah, good job. In the sense that you have sex with someone that's really good looking, and you know, you tell your boy, they're like, oh yeah, good job. But if it was a prostitute, you wouldn't say anything because people were like, oh, like you ain't actually pulled that, you ain't actually, you know, put in the work to get that, you just paid for it.
Right.
And I think that even in that situation, people are kind of ignoring the woman at all.
Right.
You know, when you're looking at a prostitute, it's easier for people like, oh, she's a hoe. But when you're looking at it after the fact, and guys are talking about it when a guy had sex with a prostitute, people are really shaming that dude for doing it. They're not even really considering the woman that was in the situation as a human, but at the same time, not even as an important part of the whole equation because she got paid. You know what I mean?
Right. Right,
So,
but I mean, she is doing a service.
I'm not saying that she's not, but I'm saying it's like, you know, yeah, she got the money, she knew what she was doing, she knew what she was getting into beforehand. It's on the man's job to not do something with something that's tainted because it's had so much sex. You know what I mean? And that mindset comes from the sense of they're not even considering that woman as a woman in that situation. They're saying, hey, you use this object to get something when you shouldn't have. Right. So I think that men get shamed too, but that in those circumstances, a woman isn't even being seen as a human being in the whole situation or circumstance. But I think that when we're talking about like a sexually liberated woman who may have, you know, 25 partners,
right,
is that she's made each individual decision on herself, and men feel like her value has gone down because of that, and that doesn't make sense.
Okay. So when bringing it full circle, what do you think would be an ideal solution? Obviously we're just like, what would you think would be an ideal solution where we just look at each other as humans first and foremost, and how do we not judge just a woman because of her sexual promiscuities, and just simply be based on that individual and the aspect of sex, we all have it. We all capable of getting pleasure, both male and female. So how could we bring it around to be just the aspect of man and woman, not the woman's considered dirtier because of the ideal of like maybe the body and penetration and all of that aspects? How can we make this something that's no more?
I mean, I think the solution is hard because I feel like it gets even crazier when you get in a situation where, you know, it's man on man, because then it's like, okay, so who's supposed to be the man in the situation? Who's supposed to be the woman? And
Right.
same thing with, you know, women relationships. But I think that the solution is kind of based in people having a certain level of respect for each other, but also understanding that I think that it's harder to kind of gauge what will work and what won't, because I think that the connotations of sex are on a large spectrum when you ask certain human beings, and when you ask certain Americans, and when you ask different age groups. You know what I mean? It's like they look at sex as a completely different thing.
Okay.
And if you're a 25-year-old, you're looking at sex different than if you're 45. But even in that breath, I've never felt that it makes sense for 20-year-olds who I do think do a lot of the slut shaming to be in that mindset, because everyone's kind of having sex, or sex is on everybody's mind. And I think that it really needs to be a situation where I think a lot of it is based on the sense of women are not seen as sexual beings in the same way as men, and that comes from both men's side, but I also think that as a woman's side, because I think, you know, women, they might even, you know, they're a lot less comfortable talking about masturbation.
Right.
And
True.
like,
Very
so
true.
it's
That's
like,
true.
why, like women, the confidence behind sexuality with women is diminished so early. But at the same time, women, like, a lot of people feel like young women need to protect it, because we do know that guys are kind of tyrants from the get about all age groups.
Okay.
So it's really about one of those things where everybody has to have respect for each other, but we also have to figure out, you know, what will keep everyone safe the most. Because I think that right now it's so one-sided, there's no way for safety to even exist on both sides. And I think that women have to be accepted into the conversation, but men also have to acknowledge the bad things that they've done in the past, and understand that changes need to be made on both sides.
Okay.
And it will all, for me, any change that exists right now, or any change that can exist right now that will actually have an impact, has to change on both sides of whatever you're whatever topic you're talking about, because it's a lot more about how the old traditions have affected us all subconsciously, rather than just how are we consciously responding to the continuation of bullshit.
Okay. So, guys, I think today that wraps up our conversation about the women. Guys, that's the end of today's video. Always remember to, actually, before I even do all of that, it was really nice having you on my channel.
It was nice being on it.
My good bud, RJ. So, I would always say definitely remember to like, subscribe, tell a friend. There's a lot more conversations to be had. And always remember to stay confident, contradictory, and consciously unconscious. See you guys.
Dang.